Alexander Chen's footsteps echoed through the sterile corridors of St. Mary's Hospital, each strike against the polished floor marking time in a rhythm that had become all too familiar. 3 days had passed since his mother Elena's stroke, and he found himself caught between two worlds, one where conference calls and quarterly reports demanded his attention, and another where machines monitored the fragile thread of his mother's life. The hospital's antiseptic smell had become a backdrop to his guilt. While Elena lay unconscious, he had fielded dozens of business calls, his phone buzzing with urgent matters that now felt strangely hollow. He told himself he was being practical, that someone needed to keep things running. But the truth gnawed at him. Even in crisis, he didn't know how to simply be present. When he pushed open the door to room 314, expecting to find his mother alone, with perhaps a duty nurse checking vitals, Alexander stopped completely. A young woman in faded scrubs sat beside Elena's bed, holding his mother's pale hand while reading softly from a weathered book. Her voice carried the melodic cadences of Spanish, words his mother had spoken to him as a child, but gradually abandoned as their family climbed society's ladder toward respectability. The woman looked up, and Alexander saw something that made him uncomfortable. Tears that seemed to come from a place deeper than professional sympathy. She didn't startle or offer excuses. Instead, she smiled with the kind of gentleness that comes from understanding pain intimately. "I'm Sophia," she said simply, closing the book but keeping her hand connected to Elena's. "I used to work for your family." Alexander's memory struggled to place her. Over the years, there had been many housekeepers, their faces blending into the background of his privileged existence. But Sophia seemed to carry herself with a dignity that suggested she had never been merely part of the background, even when others failed to notice. 15 years ago, Sophia continued, seeing his confusion. "I cleaned your house twice a week while I was trying to get through nursing school." Her fingers traced the cover of the book, his mother's favorite collection of Neruda's poetry. "Your mother, she remembered that I loved to read to my daughter during breaks. She remembered everything about people, even when they thought she wasn't paying attention." The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything Alexander thought he knew about his mother's daily life. While he had been building his business empire, focused on acquisition and expansion, Elena had been paying attention to details he never even noticed. The dreams of the woman who dusted their furniture, the struggles of someone he had probably passed in hallways without acknowledgement. Sophia's story emerged slowly, like water finding its way through stone. She had been 19 when she started working for the Chens, a teenage mother juggling multiple jobs while trying to keep her daughter fed and her dreams alive. Nursing school felt like an impossible goal until Elena began asking questions, not intrusive ones, but gentle inquiries that showed she saw Sophia as more than just hired help. "She didn't just pay for my tuition," Sophia explained, her voice carrying the weight of years of gratitude. "When I needed childcare for evening classes, she would watch Lucia. When I struggled with chemistry, she found me a tutor. When I wanted to quit during my hardest semester, she sat with me at your kitchen table and told me that education wasn't charity, it was investment in tomorrow's healers." Alexander felt something shift uncomfortably in his chest. He had lived in that house, eaten meals at that kitchen table, and somehow remained completely unaware of these quiet acts of transformation happening under his own roof. While he had been proud of his business acumen and networking skills, his mother had been building something far more substantial: human potential that would ripple outward in ways he was only beginning to understand. There were others, too, Sophia continued, and Alexander heard something in her voice that suggested this revelation was just the beginning. Over the years, your mother helped 12 women get through school, housekeepers, babysitters, women she met at the community center. We didn't know about each other at the time, but we all shared something important. We all had someone who believed in us when we had stopped believing in ourselves. She reached into her bag and withdrew a small collection of letters, their edges worn from handling. After your mother was admitted, I contacted some of the others. They wanted you to know what she meant to us. Alexander's hands trembled slightly as he took the letters. Each one painted a picture of his mother that challenged everything he thought he understood about her priorities and values. Carmen, now a pediatric nurse, wrote about how Elena's support had given her the courage to leave an abusive relationship and pursue her dreams. Isabella, working as a social worker, described Elena's quiet presence at her graduation ceremony, tears of pride in her eyes as Isabella walked across the stage. Reading these testimonials, Alexander began to question the foundation of his own identity. He had built his life around accumulation, wealth, success, recognition. But his mother had chosen a different path entirely, one that measured success not in what she gathered for herself, but in what she cultivated in others. The contrast was stark and uncomfortable, forcing him to confront the possibility that he had been pursuing a hollow version of achievement, while the real work of transformation happened in spaces he never thought to notice. "Can I stay with you?" Alexander asked, the words coming out softer than he intended. His usual boardroom authority dissolved into something more vulnerable, more real. Sophia nodded, and they arranged themselves on either side of Elena's bed. As they began taking turns reading from the poetry collection, something extraordinary happened. The clinical atmosphere of the hospital room transformed into something that felt like sanctuary. Sophia would read a verse in Spanish, her voice carrying the music of Elena's heritage. Then Alexander would follow with English, his corporate-trained precision gradually softening into something more human. Between poems, Sophia shared stories that revealed layers of his mother Alexander had never seen. Elena's habit of remembering service workers' names and asking about their families. Her practice of leaving thoughtful gifts, not expensive items, but tokens that showed she noticed people's humanity. The way she would slip extra money to housekeepers before holidays, never making a show of her generosity, but ensuring that others could provide better celebrations for their children. Alexander found himself sharing memories too, but they looked different through this new lens of understanding. The business trips Elena had never questioned took on new meaning when he realized she had been using his absences to mentor young women without making them feel like charity cases. The late dinners she had kept warm became evidence of her patient love, her willingness to maintain connection even when he was too focused on his next deal to be fully present. Hour by hour their vigil continued, and Elena's vital signs began to improve. Her breathing deepened, her color returned, and the monitors showed subtle but consistent progress. Dr. Martinez mentioned that recovery seemed accelerated when patients felt genuinely loved and witnessed, but even she seemed surprised by the rapid improvements they were documenting. On the 7th morning, as Sophia began reading a particularly beloved Neruda verse about love's endurance, Elena's eyes fluttered open. Her gaze found Sophia first, and her lips formed words that carried the weight of years of unspoken affection. "Estás aquí, mija?" The Spanish phrase meaning, "Are you here, my daughter?" emerged as barely more than a whisper, but it filled the room with transformative power. When Elena's eyes shifted to Alexander, her expression was one of wonder and completion. Here were both of her children, one born from her body, one born from her heart's deliberate choice to love beyond traditional boundaries. The tears that began flowing down Elena's cheeks spoke of a mother's deepest joy, seeing her family whole and united in love that transcended biology. Alexander felt the ground shift beneath everything he had built his life upon. His mother was teaching him that family could be chosen, that wealth could be measured in lives transformed, that the most powerful legacy was not what you accumulated, but what you helped others become. In that moment of recognition, surrounded by the evidence of his mother's quiet revolution, he began to understand what it meant to invest in human potential rather than simply financial returns. 6 months later, the Seeds of Tomorrow Foundation had taken root in ways that surprised even its founders. Elena's recovery had been remarkable, but more importantly, her brush with mortality had crystallized her understanding of how to channel resources toward transformation. Alexander brought his business expertise to creating sustainable systems, while Sophia contributed her healthcare knowledge and lived experience of overcoming barriers. Their approach honored the complexity of single mothers' lives by addressing every obstacle that stood between dreams and reality. They provided not just tuition assistance, but comprehensive support that included childcare, tutoring, mentoring relationships, and community building that helped women understand they were not alone in their struggles.